There's a peculiar thing that happens when you begin to wake up, not from sleep, but from the trance of everyday existence. It's not dramatic. There are no fireworks, no sudden revelations that arrive with trumpets and celestial choirs. Instead, it's more like watching fog lift from a valley at dawn. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the landscape of your life begins to reveal contours you'd never noticed before. And with that revelation comes something unexpected, something the self-help gurus and motivational speakers won't tell you. A gentle, inexorable pulling away from the very world you once fought so hard to understand and conquer. We're told constantly that awakening, enlightenment, consciousness expansion, whatever name we give to that fundamental shift in perception, is about becoming more engaged with life, more present, more involved. And in a sense, this is true, but it's only half the story, and perhaps not even the most important half. The other half, the part that's rarely discussed in polite spiritual circles, is this. The more awake you become, the less the conventional world makes sense. Not in an intellectual way. You can still understand traffic laws and tax codes and social protocols, but in a visceral, emotional way. The whole game begins to look increasingly like a game, and once you've seen through the rules, once you've glimpsed the arbitrary nature of the board itself, sitting down to play becomes progressively more difficult. Imagine for a moment that you've spent your entire life inside a vast theatre, watching a movie so engrossing that you forgot you were watching a movie at all. You became absorbed in the plot, invested in the characters, terrified by the villains, moved to tears by the tragedies. Your heart raced during the chase scenes. You shouted at the screen when the protagonist made foolish choices. The movie was your reality, complete and total. Now imagine that, quite by accident, you glance over your shoulder and notice, for the first time, the projection booth at the back of the theatre. You see the light streaming from it. You understand suddenly that everything on the screen is just light and shadow, carefully arranged. The movie continues. The plot goes on unfolding. But you can never quite watch it the same way again. You haven't left the theatre. You're still in your seat. But something fundamental has shifted in your relationship to what's happening on that screen. This is what awakening does. It shows you the projection booth of reality itself. And once you've seen it, once you understand at a level deeper than thought that the entire structure of what we call the world, the economy, the politics, the social hierarchies, the desperate race for achievement and recognition, is a construct, a story we're all telling together. Going back to watching that movie with full absorption becomes almost impossible. Not entirely impossible. We all get sucked back in from time to time. We forget. We get lost in the plot again. But there's always that nagging awareness in the background now, that slight sense of watching yourself watch the movie, and this double awareness changes everything. The awakened mind begins to drift not because it rejects the world, but because it sees through it. And seeing through something is very different from rejecting it. Rejection implies resistance, struggle, a pushing away. But seeing through is more like watching a magic trick after the magician has explained how it's done. You can still appreciate the skill, still admire the performance, but the spell is broken. The rabbit was in the hat the whole time. The card was up the sleeve. The woman was never actually sawed in half. And while you might continue to attend magic shows, while you might even enjoy them on a certain level, you'll never again experience that pure, open-mouthed wonder you felt as a child when you truly believed in magic. You've crossed a threshold, and there's no crossing back. What makes this drifting particularly poignant is that it often begins just as one feels they've finally figured out how to succeed in the world. You've learned the social dances, mastered the professional rituals, understood the unspoken rules that govern human interaction. You've perhaps achieved some measure of what society calls success, a career, relationships, a respectable place in the social order. And just as you're settling into this hard-won position, just as you're ready to enjoy the fruits of all that striving, the awakening comes and reveals the whole enterprise to be a kind of elaborate game of make-believe. It's like spending 20 years learning to be an expert player of Monopoly, acquiring all the best properties and hotels, only to suddenly realize with crystal clarity that it's just a board game, that the money is paper, that the properties don't actually exist, and that even if you win, you're still just sitting around a table moving a tiny metal shoe around in circles. The awakened mind looks at the feverish activity of the marketplace, the stock exchange, the corporate ladder, the social media metrics, the political debates, and sees not evil or wrongness, but something more disconcerting, play acting of cosmic proportions. Everyone's playing roles they've mostly forgotten are roles. The businessman believes he really is a businessman. The mother believes she really is just a mother. The patriot believes she really is fundamentally defined by her nationality. The intellectual believes he really is his collection of opinions and knowledge. And they all believe that the outcomes of this grand performance genuinely matter in some ultimate sense, that the difference between success and failure, between winning and losing, between being admired and being forgotten, is a difference that echoes through eternity. But the awakening reveals something else, that we are not our roles, that the outcomes don't matter in the way we thought they mattered, and that the entire drama of human affairs is happening against a background of such vast, silent, indifferent spaciousness that all our urgent concerns look like the complicated games children play in a sandbox. This doesn't make those games bad or wrong. Children's games are beautiful, creative, earnest. But once you've grown up, once you've gained the perspective of an adult, you can't quite join in with the same total absorption. You can sit beside the sandbox, watch with affection, perhaps even play along for a while, but you're always aware now that these sandcastles will be washed away, that the plastic soldiers aren't really fighting a war, that tomorrow's game will be different, and the day after that, different again. You've gained perspective, and perspective is simultaneously a gift and a burden. What Alan Watts understood so deeply, what he tried to communicate in his uniquely playful yet profound way, is that this drifting isn't a problem to be solved. It's not a bug in the Enlightenment software, it's a feature. The world needs people who are fully immersed in the game, playing their roles with passionate conviction. Civilization runs on that earnest participation. But the world also needs, perhaps especially needs, people who have drifted to the edges, who can look back at the whole swirling dance with clear eyes and remind everyone else, through their presence if not their words, that there's something beyond the dance, something prior to all the roles and rules and rituals we've constructed. These drifters serve as living reminders that the map is not the territory, that the menu is not the meal, that the game is not the player. The tragedy, if there is one, is that this drifting is often lonely. The awakened person finds themselves at family gatherings, dinner parties, professional conferences, and they're present in body but increasingly absent in spirit. They smile, they nod, they participate in the conversations about career moves and vacation plans and political outrages, but there's a growing sense of living behind glass, of being separated by an invisible membrane from the shared hallucination that everyone else is still fully inhabiting. They want to shout, "Don't you see? None of this is real in the way you think it's real. We're consciousness playing hide and seek with itself. We're the universe looking at itself through billions of temporary apertures we call people. This whole thing is an elaborate cosmic joke, and the punchline is that there's no one to get the joke, because the joker and the audience are the same being." But you can't say these things at dinner parties. People start to worry. They recommend therapists. They gently suggest that perhaps you're going through something and should take it easy, get more sleep, maybe spend less time alone with your thoughts. So the drifting continues, but in silence. The awakened mind learns to speak two languages: the language of the world, which they use in daily commerce with others, and the language of the void, which they speak in the privacy of their own being. They become translators, moving between these two linguistic worlds, never quite at home in either anymore. In the world, they feel like aliens observing curious tribal customs. In the void, in that space of pure awareness beyond all concepts and categories, they feel like they've come home. But it's a home without walls or furniture or familiar faces. It's the home of no home, the place that isn't a place, the eternal present that has no duration and no location, but somehow contains everything. And so the drift deepens, not through any particular action or decision, but through a kind of gravitational pull that becomes impossible to resist. It's as if the awakening has created a new center of gravity in your being, and this center isn't located in your social identity, your personal history, your achievements or failures, your opinions or beliefs. This new center is somewhere prior to all of that, somewhere deeper and quieter, and it pulls at you the way the moon pulls at the tides. You find yourself increasingly drawn inward, not in a neurotic or escapist sense, but in the way a river is drawn toward the sea. There's a rightness to it, an inevitability that feels less like a choice and more like a homecoming. This is where the misunderstanding often occurs. People who haven't experienced this shift assume that drifting away from the world means becoming cynical, depressed, or nihilistic. They imagine someone sitting in a dark room, declaring that nothing matters and refusing to participate in life. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The awakened mind that drifts isn't rejecting life or claiming that existence is meaningless. Quite the opposite. They're seeing for the first time that life is overflowing with meaning, with such an abundance of meaning that our conventional categories and concepts can't begin to capture it. Every leaf, every gesture, every moment of existence is saturated with a significance so profound that words become laughably inadequate. The problem isn't that nothing matters, it's that everything matters in a way that makes our usual human dramas look like static on a television screen, distracting us from the extraordinary signal underneath. The drift happens because the awakened person becomes increasingly sensitive to this signal. They start to notice the extraordinary hidden in plain sight, the miracle of breath, the mystery of consciousness arising moment by moment, the impossible beauty of light falling through leaves, the profound intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in a body without any conscious direction from the owner of that body. These aren't poetic observations or aesthetic appreciations. They're direct recognitions of what's actually happening, here and now, beneath the mental commentary we've layered over reality. And once you start noticing these things, once you begin to live from this deeper seeing, the conventional world starts to feel like a noisy distraction from what's real. Imagine trying to have a serious conversation about parking tickets and quarterly reports while a symphony is playing at full volume all around you. Imagine trying to care deeply about which political party wins an election while you're directly experiencing yourself as the consciousness in which all political parties, all elections, all governments and revolutions are appearing and disappearing like waves on an ocean. The waves are real enough as waves, but you know yourself to be the ocean. The wave problems don't vanish, but their absolute urgency dissolves. You might still vote, still pay your parking tickets, still show up for the quarterly report meeting, but you do it all with a kind of cosmic chuckle, an inner knowing that this is all part of the play, the grand theatrical production that consciousness is staging for itself. Watts talked about this constantly in different ways. He'd point out that we've confused the symbols for the reality, the money for the wealth, the menu for the meal. We've built an entire civilization on abstractions, numbers in bank accounts, lines on maps, letters of the alphabet arranged into laws and contracts and holy books. And we've forgotten that these are tools, convenient fictions we created to navigate reality, not reality itself. The awakened mind hasn't forgotten this. They see the map and the territory simultaneously. They can use the map when needed, but they never mistake it for the actual landscape. And this double vision makes sustained engagement with a world that treats the map as the territory increasingly difficult. Consider money, that most abstract of abstractions. We've all agreed to believe in these pieces of paper, these digital numbers, these representations of value. And because we all believe in them together, they function, they work. You can exchange them for food, shelter, experiences, time, attention. The system operates smoothly as long as everyone continues to believe. But the awakened mind sees through this collective hypnosis. They see that money is a story, a very useful story, but a story nonetheless. And once you see it as a story, dedicating your entire life to accumulating more of this fictional substance seems absurd. Not wrong, not immoral, just absurd in a fundamental way. It's like dedicating your life to accumulating points in a video game. The points might help you advance in the game, might unlock new levels and abilities, but at the end of the day, they're not real in any absolute sense. They exist only within the context of the game's rules and framework. This same recognition extends to everything we take seriously in the conventional world. Status. It's just the story we tell about who's important and who isn't, based on arbitrary criteria that change from culture to culture, era to era. Success. It's whatever a particular society at a particular time has decided to value, whether that's warrior prowess, spiritual devotion, financial accumulation, or social media followers. Identity itself. It's a narrative constructed from memories, interpretations, other people's opinions, cultural conditioning, and biological drives. A story so familiar, we mistake it for the author. The awakened mind sees all of this, not through intellectual analysis, but through direct perception, and this seeing naturally leads to a loosening of investment in the whole apparatus. But here's where it gets interesting, where the paradox deepens. This loosening of investment, this drift away from conventional concerns, doesn't make the awakened person useless or inactive. Often quite the opposite. Freed from the desperate need to prove themselves, to achieve, to be recognized, to win at the game, they become capable of a different kind of engagement with the world, more spontaneous, more creative, more genuinely responsive to what each moment requires. They're no longer acting from the cramped, fearful place of ego survival, no longer driven by the need to maintain and enhance their self-image. Instead, they act from a deeper intelligence, from the vast awareness that knows itself to be identical with the universe looking at itself. This is the great irony. The person who has drifted away from the world's concerns is often more present, more genuinely helpful, more truly alive than those who are frantically engaged with those concerns. The drifter isn't worried about how their actions will reflect on them, isn't calculating advantage, isn't performing for an invisible audience of judges keeping score. They're simply here, responding to what is, doing what needs to be done without the overlay of self-importance or self-protection. They become like water, taking the shape of whatever container they find themselves in, flowing where flow is possible, patient where obstacles appear, never arguing with reality, never insisting that things should be other than they are. Lao Tzu understood this when he wrote about Wei Wu Wei, doing without doing, action through non-action. It sounds paradoxical to the conventional mind, but the awakened person knows exactly what this means through direct experience. When you're no longer acting from ego, no longer trying to force reality to conform to your preferences and fears, there's a natural intelligence that flows through you, an effortless rightness to your actions. You become an instrument through which the universe acts upon itself, and this is infinitely more effective than the labored striving of the separate self, trying to impose its will on a resistant world. The world, in its conventional sense, runs on the presumption of separateness. Every institution, every social structure, every economic system is built on the foundational assumption that you are a separate individual, trapped inside a bag of skin, fundamentally alone, fundamentally in competition with other separate individuals for limited resources, recognition, and survival. This isn't a conspiracy or a mistake. It's just the most common interpretation of the human experience, the default setting of ordinary consciousness. And for most purposes of daily life, it's a perfectly functional interpretation. It allows us to navigate the social world, make plans, take responsibility, build civilizations. But the awakening reveals this interpretation to be just that, an interpretation, not an absolute truth. What actually awakens in awakening is the recognition that the boundaries we've drawn between self and other, between inside and outside, between subject and object, are conventional rather than ultimate. They're useful fictions, convenient ways of mapping reality, but they don't represent the deepest truth of what we are. The deepest truth, the one that reveals itself when thinking quiets down and direct perception emerges, is that there's only one thing going on here. Call it consciousness, call it awareness, call it the Tao, call it God, call it the universe, call it what you will. Names are just more symbols. The point is that it's all one event, one happening, one cosmic dance with no dancer behind it, just the dancing itself. This recognition doesn't come through belief or philosophy. You can believe in unity intellectually and still live entirely from the sense of separateness. The awakening that leads to the drift is something else. It's a shift in the center of identity itself. You stop identifying primarily as John or Mary, as this particular body-mind organism with its specific history and characteristics, and begin to identify as the awareness in which John or Mary appears. You are the space in which the thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions arise and disappear. You are the screen on which the movie of your life is playing. And this screen, this awareness, isn't personal. It's not yours. It's not something you have. It's what you are. And it's the same awareness that's looking out through every pair of eyes, listening through every pair of ears, thinking through every brain. Once this shift occurs, even partially, even momentarily, the game of the world begins to feel increasingly hollow. How can you compete with others when you know, at the deepest level, that the others are yourself in different disguises? How can you strive desperately for personal survival when you understand that what you really are can't be threatened, can't die, has never been born? How can you take sides in the endless conflicts that dominate human affairs when you see clearly that both sides are the same being, arguing with itself, playing out an ancient drama of division for the sheer cosmic entertainment of it? This is where the drift becomes inevitable. Not immediate, not necessarily dramatic, but inevitable in the way autumn becomes winter, in the way the moon wanes after it waxes. You can't sustain full passionate engagement with a game once you've realized it's a game and you're playing it with yourself. You can still play, of course. You can still participate. But there's a quality of lightness to it now, a lack of ultimate seriousness. When a chess master plays chess with a beginner, she might play with focus and skill, might make elegant moves and interesting gambits, but she's not gripping the pieces with sweaty palms, not lying awake at night, worried about the outcome. She knows it's just chess. She knows that win or lose, nothing fundamental changes. The awakened person begins to relate to all of life's activities with this same quality of relaxed engagement. Friends and family often notice this shift and worry about it. They see the person they knew becoming somehow less driven, less concerned with the things that normal people are concerned with. "What happened to you?" they ask. "You used to be so ambitious, so engaged, so passionate about your work, your politics, your plans for the future. Now you seem distant. Are you depressed? Have you given up? And how do you explain that you haven't given up but seen through? How do you convey that you're not depressed but have awakened to a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances? How do you communicate that you haven't become less alive but more alive, not less engaged but engaged from a different dimension altogether? You probably don't explain. You can't. Language fails here because language itself is part of the game, part of the conceptual framework that the awakening has transcended. Words are symbols, and symbols can only point to other symbols. They can't capture the territory itself, can't convey the direct taste of reality unfiltered by thought. So the awakened person learns to move quietly, to speak the language of the world when necessary, to play the required social roles with whatever skill they can muster, but always with that secret knowledge humming in the background, that recognition that none of this is what it appears to be, that reality is infinitely stranger, infinitely more wonderful, infinitely more mysterious than the conventional narrative suggests. The drift accelerates because the world has less and less to offer someone who has tasted what lies beyond the world. The pleasures that once motivated, sensory pleasures, ego pleasures, the pleasure of achievement and recognition, begin to pale in comparison to the simple, causeless joy of being. Not the joy of being something in particular, not the joy of being successful or loved or admired, but just the raw fact of existence itself, the impossible miracle that there is something rather than nothing, that awareness is here, that the universe has arranged itself into this particular configuration right now, reading these words, being this moment. This joy isn't emotional in the ordinary sense. It doesn't come and go based on circumstances. It's more like a ground tone, a fundamental vibration that's always present once you notice it, whether you're washing dishes, sitting in traffic, or watching someone you love. It's the joy of the universe recognizing itself, celebrating itself, through this particular aperture called your life. And once you've accessed this, once you've discovered the spring of causeless contentment that wells up from nowhere and doesn't depend on anything, why would you chase after the conditional pleasures that the world offers? Why would you spend your precious hours climbing ladders, collecting trophies, fighting battles, proving points, when you could simply be here, resting in this, the only thing that actually exists, this moment, this awareness, this inexplicable presence? The world calls this laziness, escapism, disconnection. The world says you're not living up to your potential, not making a contribution, not playing your part in the great march of progress. But the awakened mind knows something the world doesn't know, that the great march of progress is going nowhere, because there's nowhere to go. We're already here. We've already arrived. The destination we're all seeking is the place we're seeking from. The treasure is buried in the ground beneath our feet, but we're too busy running around with treasure maps to notice. The awakened person has stopped running. They've looked down. They've seen the treasure. And now the maps, however detailed and colourful and convincing, just don't have the same appeal. There's a peculiar clarity that comes with this deepening drift, a way of seeing that's simultaneously more lucid and more dreamlike than ordinary perception. The world becomes at once more vivid and less solid. Colours seem richer, sounds more textured, the play of light and shadow more remarkable. Yet simultaneously, the whole display begins to take on a quality of transparency, as if you're seeing through the appearance to the emptiness that underlies and pervades everything. Not emptiness in the sense of nihilistic void, but emptiness in the Buddhist sense, shunyata, the fertile emptiness from which all forms arise and into which they return, the pregnant nothing that is paradoxically everything. This is confusing to describe because it's not a conceptual understanding, but a perceptual shift. It's like those optical illusions where you can see either two faces or a vase, but not both simultaneously. Except in this case, you're beginning to see both at once. The world is real and vivid and immediate, and the world is also empty, transparent, dreamlike. The person you see in the mirror is you, with your specific history and characteristics and personality. And that person is also just another appearance in consciousness, no more you than the tree outside the window or the sound of traffic in the distance. Both perspectives are true. Both are happening simultaneously. And living from this doubled awareness naturally leads to the drift, because the conventional world requires you to take one side of this duality seriously while ignoring or denying the other. The social contract that binds human civilization together depends on everyone agreeing to treat the appearance as the reality. We agree to act as if we are separate individuals, as if our names and identities are ultimately real, as if the social hierarchies and political boundaries and economic systems are objectively true rather than collectively maintained fictions. We agree to this because it's necessary for the game to work, for society to function, for the human project to continue. And there's nothing wrong with this agreement. It serves important purposes. But once you've seen through it, once you've recognized it as an agreement rather than a truth, participating in it with the same innocent conviction becomes impossible. The awakened person finds themselves in a strange double life. Outwardly, they navigate the world's requirements, fulfill their obligations, maintain relationships, participate in society's rituals. They might have a job, pay taxes, vote in elections, show up to family gatherings. From the outside, they might look entirely normal, perhaps even successful by conventional standards. But inwardly, they're living in a different reality altogether, a reality where none of these external activities have the weight and significance that everyone else seems to assign to them. They're playing their role in the cosmic drama, but they know it's a role. They're showing up for the performance, but they're not confused about the difference between the actor and the character. This split between inner reality and outer performance is one of the loneliest aspects of the awakening process. You can't really explain to people that you're engaged with them while simultaneously knowing that engagement itself is a kind of loving fiction. You can't tell your employer that you'll do the work competently, but you recognize the entire economic system as an elaborate game of symbols and abstractions. You can't inform your romantic partner that you love them deeply while also perceiving them as a temporary configuration of the universal consciousness, appearing for a brief moment before dissolving back into the source. These truths, which are perfectly clear to the awakened mind, sound insane or heartless when spoken in ordinary language within ordinary contexts. So silence becomes a refuge. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of having too much to say, of recognizing that what most wants to be communicated can't be communicated through words. The deepest teachings, the most profound recognitions, can only be transmitted through presence, through the quality of being that emanates from someone who has genuinely awakened. This is why all the great spiritual teachers eventually resort to paradox, poetry, humor, koans, or simple silence. They've seen that direct teaching is impossible because awakening isn't information that can be transferred from one mind to another. It's a shift in the very structure of consciousness itself, and each person must undergo that shift for themselves. No one can do your awakening for you, just as no one can do your sleeping, or your dreaming, or your dying for you. These are existential events that each consciousness must experience directly. The drift, then, is also a drift into silence, or at least into a more economical use of language. Words begin to feel increasingly hollow, increasingly inadequate to the reality they're attempting to capture. The awakened person notices themselves speaking less, or speaking differently, more carefully, more precisely, with an awareness of the gap between the word and the thing, between the concept and the experience. They become suspicious of abstract nouns, wary of jargon, allergic to the kind of bloated pseudo-profundity that dominates so much spiritual discourse. They prefer the concrete, the immediate, the specific detail that points directly to experience rather than layering more concepts over reality. Watts exemplified this approach. He could speak with apparent sophistication about Vedanta, or Buddhism, or Taoism, could reference philosophers and scientists and mystics, but at the core of his teaching was always a radical simplicity. Wake up, see what's actually here, stop confusing the symbol for the reality. He'd talk about the eternal now, not as some mystical concept, but as the only time that actually exists. The past is present memory. The future is present anticipation. All there ever is, all there can ever be, is this moment, this breath, this sensation, this awareness. Everything else is imagination, useful imagination, necessary imagination for practical purposes, but imagination nonetheless. And when you begin to live from this recognition, when the now becomes not a philosophy, but your actual experience of reality, the entire structure of worldly concern begins to crumble. Because all worldly concern is based on time, on regret about the past, anxiety about the future, comparison between how things are and how you think they should be. But in the timeless present, in the eternal now, there's no problem. There's only what is, exactly as it is, and what is always complete in itself, lacking nothing, requiring nothing. The situation might be pleasant or unpleasant, comfortable or uncomfortable, but these are just qualities of experience, not problems that need to be solved. They're just what's happening, and what's happening is always and already okay, because there's no standard outside of what's happening by which it could be judged inadequate. This acceptance, not passive resignation, but active embrace of what is, naturally leads to further drift from the world's projects and problems. The world is constantly trying to fix itself, improve itself, perfect itself, evolve towards some imagined future where everything will finally be right. And this project never succeeds because it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding. It assumes that the present is broken and needs to be fixed, that reality is somehow wrong and needs to be corrected. But reality can't be wrong. Reality is simply what is. It's the standard of rightness itself, the only truth, the only fact. Everything else is interpretation, evaluation, judgment, mental additions to what's actually here. The awakened mind stops adding these layers. They see what's here without immediately interpreting it as good or bad, desirable or undesirable, something to approach or avoid. They rest in the bare awareness of presence itself, and from this resting comes a natural response to circumstances that's far more effective than the reactive patterns of the conditioned mind. The response isn't calculated or strategic. It arises spontaneously from the situation itself, the way the right word arises when you're fluent in a language, without having to consciously search for it or construct it. This is the action of no action, the doing that happens through you rather than by you, and it has a quality of grace, of effortlessness, that the ego's labored striving can never achieve. But let's not romanticize this drift into something it isn't. There's a danger in spiritual circles of making awakening sound like arriving at some permanent state of blissful detachment, where nothing bothers you and everything is wonderful. This is nonsense. The awakened mind still lives in a human body, still has human feelings, still experiences pain and discomfort and sadness and frustration. What changes isn't the content of experience, but the relationship to that content. The experiences still arise. They must, as long as there's a functioning nervous system, but they're no longer taken personally. They're recognized as weather patterns moving through the space of awareness, not as fundamental truths about who you are or what reality is. This might sound like a subtle distinction, but it makes all the difference. When sadness arises, and you are that sadness, when you identify completely with the feeling, it's overwhelming. It is you, and you are trapped in it, and there's no escape. But when sadness arises, and you recognize it as an appearance in awareness, as a particular pattern of sensations and thoughts moving through the space you are, there's a natural spaciousness around it. The sadness can be fully felt, fully experienced, without drowning in it, without building a story about what it means, without needing to make it go away. It's just sad weather moving through. You don't try to stop rain by arguing with clouds. You let the rain fall, knowing it will pass, as all weather passes. This capacity to feel everything fully, while not being defined by what you feel, is another reason the awakened mind drifts from the world. The world wants you to identify with your feelings, to be your emotions, to construct your identity around your psychological patterns. The entire self-help industry, most of psychotherapy, the education system, the advertising industry, they all depend on you believing you are the person, the personality, the collection of habitual reactions and conditioned responses. Because if you are that person, then you need to improve that person, heal that person, express that person, fulfill that person's potential. You need the products and services and techniques that promise to make that person happier, healthier, more successful, more enlightened. But the awakening reveals that you're not that person. That person is something appearing in you, the way a character appears in a dream. The character seems real while the dream is happening, seems to have genuine concerns and problems. But when you wake up, you recognize it was just a dream character, a temporary configuration of consciousness, not your true identity. Similarly, the person you think you are, with your name, your history, your personality traits, your beliefs and opinions and preferences, is a dream character appearing in the vast aware space that you actually are. And this aware space doesn't need improvement or healing or fulfillment. It's already complete, already whole, already perfect in its very nature as pure awareness. So the drift away from the world is partly a drift away from the entire project of self-improvement, which is one of the main engines of modern society. You're no longer trying to become someone better, someone more enlightened, someone more spiritual. You've seen through the fundamental con. There's no one there to improve. There's just this awareness, displaying itself as thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, including the thought of being a separate person who needs to improve. But that thought is just another appearance in awareness, no more you than the thought of a pink elephant or the memory of yesterday's breakfast. When this is really seen, the compulsive drive towards self-transformation drops away. Not because you've achieved some final state of perfection, but because you've seen through the illusion of the separate self who could achieve or fail to achieve anything. This is often misunderstood as spiritual bypassing or avoidance of genuine psychological work. You're just using non-dual philosophy to avoid dealing with your trauma, your shadow, your unresolved patterns, the critics say. And they're sometimes right. There are plenty of people who use spiritual concepts as a defense mechanism, a way to intellectually escape from painful feelings or difficult life circumstances. But genuine awakening is different. It doesn't avoid anything. It includes everything, welcomes everything, because it recognizes that everything is itself, that there's nothing separate from consciousness that could be avoided or rejected. The awakened person doesn't avoid their trauma. They experience it so fully, so directly, without the buffering layer of story and interpretation, that it loses its power to condition their behavior. The pain is felt, the sensation is experienced, and then it passes, the way everything passes, including the sensation of being a person with trauma. This radical inclusiveness, this willingness to be with whatever is, paradoxically makes the awakened person less interested in the world's solutions to human suffering. Meditation techniques, therapeutic modalities, self-help programs, spiritual practices, all of these are based on the premise that you're not okay as you are and need to do something to become okay. But awakening reveals that you're already okay, have always been okay, couldn't not be okay, because what you are is the awareness in which all states of okayness and not okayness appear. You are the space in which both pleasure and pain arise, both success and failure, both clarity and confusion. And this space is untouched by anything that appears in it, the way the movie screen is untouched by the images projected onto it, whether those images are of war or peace, love or hate, beauty or horror. From this recognition comes a natural compassion, but it's not the compassion of the sympathetic ego, the person who feels sorry for others and wants to help them. It's the compassion of identity, the recognition that the suffering appearing over there in another person is your own suffering, that the consciousness looking out through their eyes is the same consciousness looking out through yours, that there is literally no difference at the deepest level between you and anyone or anything else. This compassion acts, certainly. It responds to suffering where response is possible, but it doesn't act from a sense of being a savior helping victims. It acts the way your hand naturally moves to remove a splinter from your foot, not because the hand is helping the foot out of noble altruism, but because they're part of the same body, the same organism. This embodied understanding of non-separation makes the whole structure of conventional morality look different. Morality typically operates from the assumption of separateness. I am here, you are there, and I need rules and principles to guide how I should treat you, this separate other. But when the separation is seen through, when there's a direct recognition that we're all expressions of the same consciousness, morality becomes spontaneous rather than prescribed. You don't need rules telling you not to hurt yourself. You naturally avoid it because hurting yourself feels bad, is counterproductive to your well-being. Similarly, when you recognize others as yourself, harming them becomes as absurd as hitting yourself with a hammer. You don't do it, not because you're following a moral commandment, but because it's obviously foolish, obviously contrary to the well-being of the whole organism of which you're a part. But, and this is important, this doesn't mean the awakened person becomes some kind of universal do-gooder, dedicating themselves to saving the world from suffering. That would still be operating from the illusion that there's someone who needs to save a world that's fundamentally broken. Instead, the awakened person responds naturally and appropriately to whatever circumstances arise, helping where help is possible, accepting where acceptance is required, acting where action is called for, and remaining still where stillness is appropriate. They're not driven by the egoic need to be seen as good or spiritual or compassionate. They're simply functioning as an integrated part of the whole, responding to the whole's movements the way a wave responds to the ocean's currents. This brings us to one of the deepest paradoxes of the awakened state. The closer you come to understanding reality, the less you can say about it. Language works by making distinctions, by dividing the seamless continuum of existence into discrete categories and concepts. We say tree, and we've separated that shape and collection of sensations from everything else, given it a boundary, made it into a thing. But reality doesn't come pre-divided into things. The division is something the mind does, a useful tool for navigating experience, but not an accurate description of what's actually happening. The tree doesn't end where we say it ends. It's continuous with the soil, with the air, with the sunlight, with the water cycle, with the entire ecosystem, with the planet, with the universe. Where exactly does the tree stop and not tree begin? The boundary is arbitrary, a convenient fiction. The awakened mind sees through these arbitrary boundaries, recognizes the fundamental continuity of all existence, and this recognition makes language increasingly inadequate. How do you describe the indescribable? How do you talk about the territory when all you have are maps? How do you point to the truth when the pointer is necessarily not the truth itself, but another symbol, another concept, another abstraction? The great mystics across all traditions eventually arrive at this problem. They speak in paradoxes, in negatives, neti, not this, not that, trying to indicate reality by systematically eliminating all the false descriptions, hoping that somehow, after all the wrong answers have been ruled out, the truth will reveal itself in the space that remains. But truth doesn't reveal itself through elimination either. Truth can't be found through any mental process, because truth isn't a mental object. It's what's here before and after and during all mental processes, the background against which all thinking happens, the awareness in which all concepts appear. And this awareness can't be grasped by the mind any more than the eye can see itself directly. The mind can think about awareness, can have concepts about consciousness, but these thoughts and concepts are themselves appearances in awareness, objects known by the consciousness that's trying to know itself. It's like trying to bite your own teeth, structurally impossible, a category error. This is why the awakened person eventually stops trying to figure things out, stops trying to construct the perfect philosophy or theology or metaphysics that will explain everything. They recognize that the map-making project, however sophisticated and detailed the maps become, will never produce the territory. The territory is here now, immediate, prior to all maps. It's the felt sense of being, the raw presence of experience before we name it and categorize it and fit it into our conceptual frameworks. And this raw presence is always already fully known, because it's what you are. You are the knowing of it. There's no gap between the awareness and what it's aware of in this most intimate sense. They're one event, one happening, appearing as the subject-object structure of experience, but actually prior to and beyond that structure. When this is realized, not as an idea, but as a lived recognition, the motivation to seek drops away. You stop searching for truth because you realize you're standing on it. You've always been standing on it. You couldn't not be standing on it. The seeking was the obstacle, the thing that kept you from recognizing what was already here. It's like looking everywhere for your glasses while they're on your face. The looking itself prevents you from noticing that you can already see clearly. Similarly, the spiritual search, with all its practices and techniques and goals and stages, can become the very thing that prevents awakening, because it reinforces the illusion that you're not already awake, that you're a separate seeker who needs to achieve something in the future that you don't have now. But drop the seeking, drop the idea that you need to become enlightened, drop the entire project of spiritual achievement, and what remains? Just this, just the simple, ordinary, extraordinary miracle of being here, being aware, being alive. Just the sounds you're hearing, the sensations you're feeling, the thoughts arising and dissolving in awareness like clouds in the sky. Nothing special, nothing mystical, nothing to write home about, and yet somehow infinite, somehow sacred, somehow complete. This is what Zen calls your original face, what you were before your parents were born, before the universe began, before time and space and causation. Not something you attain through practice, but something you recognize you've always been, the same way you don't attain your face through practice. You just see it when you look in a mirror. And with this recognition comes the final drift, the ultimate loosening of investment in the conventional world. Because the world, in all its noise and fury, in all its problems and solutions, its dramas and tragedies and triumphs, is happening inside you, inside this awareness that you are. The world isn't external to consciousness, it's consciousness itself, taking form, playing, exploring, experiencing itself through billions of temporary apertures called bodies and minds. You are the whole show, pretending very convincingly to be one of the characters in the show, so convincingly that you've almost entirely forgotten that you're the director, the actor, the stage, the lights, the audience, everything. The awakening is just the moment when you remember, when the character suddenly recognizes itself as consciousness playing character. And this recognition is simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means the character's concerns aren't as ultimate as they seemed. Your career, your relationships, your achievements, your failures, your entire biography, all of it is the temporary play of consciousness, significant within the story, but not significant to the consciousness that's authoring the story. You could have lived a completely different life, been born in a different body, different culture, different century, and the awareness would be exactly the same awareness, having different experiences, but fundamentally unchanged by those experiences. This relativizes everything you thought was essential about your identity, shows it to be contingent, temporary, ultimately empty of any solid, enduring self. But liberating, because if nothing about your personal story is ultimately real in the way you thought it was real, then you're free of the whole burden of maintaining and defending and improving that story. You can relax into what you actually are, the aware space in which all stories appear. And from this relaxation comes a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a joy that doesn't need reasons, a love that isn't limited to specific objects, but radiates in all directions simply because love is the nature of consciousness, recognizing itself everywhere. Not sentimental love, not emotional attachment, but the love that is identity, the recognition that all of this is you, that separation was always an illusion, that you are the universe experiencing itself from this particular angle, through this particular nervous system, in this particular moment. So where does all of this leave the awakened person in practical terms? They're still here, still inhabiting a body, still moving through the world's spaces, still encountering other people, still facing the daily requirements of physical existence. They still need food, shelter, some degree of social interaction. They haven't transcended biology or materiality. They haven't left the earth for some ethereal realm. And yet everything is different, inflected with a quality that's invisible to external observation, but utterly transformative to inner experience. They're playing the same game everyone else is playing, but they know it's a game, and this knowledge changes the quality of the playing entirely. There's often a period of disorientation after awakening, a time when the person struggles to find their footing in a world that suddenly seems more dreamlike than substantial. How do you maintain a career when you see through the entire structure of economic value? How do you sustain relationships when you recognize that the sense of separation between yourself and others is ultimately illusory? How do you participate in politics, in social causes, in the human project of improvement and progress, when you've seen that everything is already perfect in its very imperfection, already complete in its very incompleteness? These aren't abstract philosophical questions, but practical dilemmas that every awakened person must navigate. Some people respond by withdrawing entirely, becoming renunciates, hermits, monks, deliberately removing themselves from conventional society to live in communities of fellow seekers or in solitude. This is an ancient and honored path, and for some, it's the only way to maintain the clarity of awakening without constant contamination from the world's confusion. But it's not the only path, and arguably not the most challenging one. The greater challenge, perhaps, is to remain in the world without being of it, to engage fully with life's ordinary activities while maintaining the inner recognition of their ultimate emptiness, to play the game with skill and care while never forgetting it's a game. This is the path of what Zen Buddhism calls going to the marketplace with open hands, of returning to the ordinary world after enlightenment and living there without any special claims to spiritual status or superiority. The awakened person might look entirely conventional from the outside, working a job, raising children, participating in community life, but inwardly they're coming from a completely different place, a place of causeless contentment that doesn't need circumstances to be any particular way. They're not trying to accumulate spiritual merit or demonstrate their enlightenment or attract followers. They're simply being here, doing what needs to be done, responding appropriately to what each moment requires, without the overlay of self-concern that dominates most human action. This anonymous awakening, this enlightenment that doesn't announce itself, is perhaps the most mature expression of the drift we've been exploring. The person has drifted so far from the world's values and concerns that they no longer feel any need to differentiate themselves from the world, to establish themselves as somehow special or separate. They've seen through the spiritual ego just as thoroughly as they've seen through the conventional ego. They're not trying to be awakened. They're not trying to be anything. They're just here, present, aware, responsive, without any self-image to maintain or protect or project. This is the teaching beyond teaching, the enlightenment that leaves no trace, the awakening that looks suspiciously like ordinary life because it has realized that ordinary life was always extraordinary, was always divine, was always the play of consciousness with itself. And yet there's still a drift, even in this mature stage. Not a drift away from ordinary activities, but a drift away from identification with those activities, away from the belief that they constitute who you are or what life is fundamentally about. The awakened person cooks meals and washes dishes and goes to work and pays bills, but they're not confused about the relationship between these activities and reality itself. The activities are real within the conventional framework, necessary and important within the context of maintaining a human life, but they're not the final truth. They're not what life is for. They're just what's happening, part of the dance, part of the display, and the consciousness that witnesses the dance is infinitely more interested in the witnessing itself than in the specific forms the dance takes. This might sound passive or detached, but it's actually the opposite. The person who knows themselves as consciousness, rather than as a particular character in consciousness's play, is paradoxically more engaged, more alive, more present than those who are lost in identification with their roles. Because they're not defending a position, not protecting an image, not advancing an agenda, they can respond freshly to each moment, unconditioned by the past, unrestricted by habitual patterns. They become like children in this way, not childish but childlike, meeting each experience with wonder and openness, not knowing what should happen but curious about what will happen, delighting in the sheer improbability of existence itself. And perhaps this is the ultimate meaning of the drift, the final destination of the journey away from the world's concerns. Not a destination in space or time, not an achievement or attainment, but a return to the beginning, to the primordial state before socialization and conditioning carved a separate self out of the seamless continuum of awareness. The awakened person has drifted back to the source, discovered themselves to be the source, and from this recognition comes a natural spontaneity, a natural joy, a natural compassion that doesn't need to be cultivated or maintained because it's simply what consciousness is when it's not confused about its own nature. The world will continue its frantic activity, its endless cycles of desire and fear, achievement and failure, construction and destruction. The dramas will continue to unfold on the screen of consciousness, new stories replacing old stories, new characters replacing old characters, the same patterns playing out in different costumes across the centuries. And somewhere in this swirl of activity, here and there, individuals will wake up from the dream, recognize the dreamer, see through the game, drift away from the compulsive engagement that defines ordinary human life. They won't make a big deal of it. They won't wear special robes or claim special status or establish new religions. They'll just be here, quietly awake, gently present, softly radiant with the recognition of what they are, serving as silent reminders to everyone they encounter that there's something else, something more fundamental than all our getting and spending and striving and seeking. These drifters, these quiet ones who have seen through the game without rejecting it, who participate without being fooled, who play while knowing they're playing. They're not trying to convert anyone, or save anyone, or teach anyone anything. They're simply living from their recognition, allowing consciousness to express itself through this particular form in whatever way arises naturally. And if someone is ready to hear, ready to see, ready to wake up from the trance of conventional existence, they might catch something from being around such a person, might sense the possibility of a different relationship to life, might begin their own drift away from the world and toward the truth that has always been here, waiting to be recognized, as near as your next breath, as obvious as the awareness in which these words are appearing right now, in this eternal present moment. That is the only time there ever really is.